Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This highly practical podcast series explores HR and management hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Brought to you by Actus software, our aim is to build a better workplace for people. The HR Uprising is about collaborating and supporting each other to build the confidence and skills to rise up to each challenge and deliver real, lasting business value. You can find out more at hruprising.com or join our LinkedIn community. Now introducing your host, chartered psychologist, best-selling author, entrepreneur and speaker, Lucinda.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And I'm really excited about this podcast because I met this gentleman virtually a couple of months ago, and I realised he was a font of knowledge all about neuroscience, basically, and neuroleadership in particular. So I approached John and asked him if he would be willing to, John Whitfield, who's currently, well, you're training, you're actually, this is almost a side point for you, John, isn't it? Because you work for the Royal Mail. Do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah. Thanks, Lucinda, and thanks for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to this. Yeah, I don't often get a chance to talk about the stuff I'm interested in because a lot of people just look at me and the eyes roll as much as say, "Oh, he's not on about that again, is he?" But this is going to be good. Yeah, I work at Royal Mail as a training manager and heavily involved in learning and development. But this is something that I've got involved in as a sideline, if you like. I think in about 2016, I read a book that had a chapter on, how the brain alters performance, and I was hooked since then. And ever since then, I've read everything I can get hold of, TED Talks. I must say that I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've read a lot of books written by neuroscientists, and so this is all stuff as I understand it. I've not done any of the research, unfortunately. I wish I could have done, but unfortunately not.
So we're sharing knowledge that's gleaned as opposed to saying that you're going to be an expert. There's a disclaimer that comes with the information, but there is with any information, isn't there? So so you got interested in neuroscience, and I know that you know a lot about it just from an ad hoc conversation we had, but we thought we'd focus on a few specific points, didn't we, in terms of neuroscience and what might be relevant to this audience. And I suppose, actually, I know we're going to go and talk about sleep, but I thought maybe because we're recording this in the afternoon, aren't we? And we were just having a conversation where you were saying what the right time of day it is and whether or not we're going to be able to give of our best, because actually at 3:30 in the afternoon may not be the ideal time. And I think lots of people know that to do with circadian rhythms and stuff. But why is there? What's the link with neuroscience for that?
Well, yeah, it all links with sleep as well. But as you say, we'll revisit sleep in a moment. But our brain's made up of various different parts, and we've got a part of the brain which is called the prefrontal cortex, which sits behind our forehead, really, and that's our part of the brain that gives us all our rational thought. It gives us the opportunity to talk like this as normal, sort of everyday people without getting overly emotional. We can decide, we can plan, we can do all the stuff. We can make critical decisions. It's what they call the chief executive officer of our brain. It's the bit that, makes everything tick. However, it's not very efficient. So on any given day, from the time we wake up to the time we go back to sleep, we've probably only got 3 or 4 hours of good stuff in our prefrontal cortex, which is why it's really, really important to prioritize your day properly. Because if you don't, you're in trouble. Now, prioritization itself is an incredibly draining task on the brain. It takes a lot of thought to decide things. And whenever you make a decision, it takes away some of that energy from that part of the brain. So what neuroscientists have said is you need to set up your day intelligently, brain friendly. So what's the first thing we normally do when we turn on our computer, Lucinda?
People do things like emails, don't they? And sort of
email. Definitely.
Sort of thing.
Now,
maybe social.
We look on emails, and a busy person like yourself, when you turn your laptop on, you've probably got quite a lot of emails that require either replies or reading or something like that. By the time you've got through it, you've lost probably quarter or half of your potential in your prefrontal cortex. And that's before you get onto the daily stuff. So what neuroscience is saying is do the important tasks first during the day. Prioritize your importance. So if you've got say you've got an important pitch to give to investors, for instance, or there's a project you've been working on that you need to deliver to stakeholders now, today, do that first. Get that sorted first, because your brain will have the energy to be brilliant. The longer you leave it, the harder it becomes. And we've all felt that when we're looking at something and we find it so difficult to concentrate, and we go in, and then the next thing, phone makes a noise, and we look at the phone. That's because your prefrontal cortex has lost the ability to become the brake. The prefrontal cortex we have on the side, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is behind the temples, these act as a brake. So whenever the phone buzzes, if it's first thing in the morning, we can ignore that quite happily. Later in the day, when everything's tired, we'll give in and we'll just look at it. And before you know it, we're looking at emails. And once we lose that concentration, it can take anything that scientists say, anything between 25 minutes and an hour to get our brain back to where we were. So it's really, really important that we prioritize our day intelligently. So as I said when we were talking earlier, so 3:30, I've had a very busy day. I've been involved in calls, designing things, and all that sort of stuff. And I feel tired. So I was thinking to myself, wow, I hope I've still got enough energy left in the prefrontal cortex to give you something relevant. But also, once the prefrontal cortex gets tired, the limbic system takes over, which is our emotional side. Now, you might say, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the limbic system hasn't got a break. And so when you're at the mercy of your limbic system, you're more likely to be emotionally hijacked. So a naughty email comes through at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon is much more likely to trigger you than it would do at 9 o'clock in the morning. And you're more likely at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to reply very quickly than you would do first thing in the morning, which causes issues in the workplace and things like that. So you'll always know if you're dealing with somebody who's had a busy day and, possibly you're talking about performance or something in the workplace, think to yourself, is it really the right time to do it? Can it wait till the next day? Because neither of you are going to be in the right place to have a good quality conversation about what needs to be done. Because A, you can't decide, you've got no energy left. B, your limbic system saying, I'm going into fight or flight mode. And then C, before you know it, you've replied to an email in the heat of the moment, or you've said something on a conference call that can't be unsaid. And it gets a bit messy, Lucinda, if I'm honest. So, yeah, that's why we have to kind of prioritise a bit wisely.
It's interesting because, I'll pass my query on that will actually be, how does that relate to people who have perhaps considered themselves to be morning people or evening people? Because certainly I find myself, I do try to avoid going to my emails first thing, because my best time of day is first thing in the morning. So that's when if I've got to write something or do something creative, I will try and do that first before I have to go and do things which are less taxing, I suppose. So I naturally will do that, but I've always considered it's because I'm more of a morning person. I certainly couldn't do it later on, but I do hear some people would say that they have better times of day like late on, which actually that doesn't really make sense if it is to do with their executive function. Would you call it that as well? That the term for this?
It is. Yeah, the executive function, absolutely right. Now, people have preferences. People will have a preference. I prefer to do this early in the afternoon or late at night, and that's fine. If that works best for you, that works best for you. Your brain will have created a process where it knows where the best time. So it may well understand that it'll save a little bit. However, everybody's brain is the same. So if you fry it first thing in the morning with 100 emails and then a couple of WhatsApp messages and Facebook and Twitter and all that, by 10, 11 o'clock, you're thinking, wow. And then when somebody drops something in your desk and say, they've got a really interesting project, can you have a look at it and get some thoughts back to us by 2 o'clock, please? You're looking at that thinking, I don't know where to start. I really don't know where to start. And that's because your brain's fried. Your prefrontal cortex has gone, I'm going. Now, what you can do, you can alleviate that a little bit by going outside, get some fresh air, get some exercise, which oxygenates the brain and feeds oxygen into the prefrontal cortex. Take in some glucose, which the brain is only about 2 or 3% of our body weight, but it takes 20% of the glucose that's available to us at any given time. So it's very energy hungry. And you can do that, or you can have a nap. And I think Google famously put sleep pods in their offices. I'm not sure if they're still there, but they did some research and said if people can have a nap in the afternoon, it makes them more creative later on. So yeah, there are preferences, but generally everybody's brain works the same.
So that would recharge it. You quite literally clearing your head if you go out for a walk or something like that, or sleep.
If you ask any doctor or neuroscientist or anybody involved in peak performance, they will always factor in naps.
Right. Okay. I'm absolutely hopeless at naps. I've never been able to do that. I don't know if there's a trick to it. But let's talk about sleep then. But so yes. How does that affect our ability to function effectively?
Well, you get these people. You get the high performers who say, "I only need 4 hours of sleep, and I can doctor on," and that's great. But the scientists say that you've got more if you have got more chance of being hit by lightning than being of one of those special people who can actually survive on that much sleep. In general, we all need between 7 and 9 hours. 8, we average out. We'll say 8 hours. Everybody gets that per night. They're in a good place. But whenever I do leadership development or anything like that, and I say, right, what's your daily routine look like? Everybody says to me, well, I get up at 5, I'm out for 6, I'm at the office for 5:30, blah, blah, blah. Great. But your day doesn't start there. Your day starts the night before the time you go to bed, because that's the time where your brain is getting ready for the next day. Because when you go to sleep, you've got 5 stages of sleep. You've got 4 stages of what they call non-REM, which is non-rapid eye movement, and you've got the rapid eye movement at the end of the celebrity of the sleep cycle, I like to call it, because everybody's heard of that. And each cycle works on a different set of brain waves, and it cleans the brain. It cleans the brain. It gets rid of all what we call the plaque we have stuff called cerebrospinal fluid. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. It's struggle to get those out. Cerebrospinal fluid goes throughout the brain and washes what they call brain plaque away. And it does that. Now, if you're only getting 2 cycles of sleep, normally a cycle of sleep lasts about 90 minutes. So you go through the 5 stages in about 90 minutes. And the final stage is always REM sleep. If you are only having 2 cycles instead of 6 or 7 cycles, you're not getting the cleaning you should have. Now, famously, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were both advocates of only getting 4 hours sleep a night. However, both famously fell to Alzheimer's late in life. Now, neuroscientists have linked heavily poor quality sleep with the onset of dementia. And science is really, really spending a lot of money on the study of that at the moment. And the World Health Organization has measured night shift work, and they've calculated that it's a probable carcinogen. Now, not a possible, a probable carcinogen, because we're not nocturnal beings. We're supposed to sleep at night, and it throws everything out. So sleep is incredibly important in the realms, because not only does it recharge the batteries, but it cleans the brain and also consolidates memory as well. So if we're learning something, everything we've learned in the day is consolidated when we sleep. So, Lucinda, I don't know if you've ever been out for a night out with your friends and maybe you had one too many.
Not for a while.
No, nobody did. But when you go out and maybe you've had one too many, and I wouldn't believe that you'd ever get in such a state, but maybe you wake up the next morning and think, I don't remember getting home last night, or something like that. It's because your brain, you haven't slept properly. When you're in an alcohol-induced sleep, you don't sleep as deeply as you would do normally, which means your brain cannot consolidate memories. You don't sleep properly, you don't remember properly. That's why you have big gaps of what happened throughout the night. Now, in time, you probably get some of that back, but a lot of it will be lost forever. And that's because the sleep consolidates it all. And for me, if anybody ever says to me, what's one of the most important things you can do to be good, is sleep efficiently. Because if you don't, you might not feel it today, but you will get there. And somebody who doesn't get the 7 hours, maybe gets 4 hours, or just on one night, they reckon it can cause the IQ to drop by 10 points.
Quite dramatic, isn't it? And also, you feel more, going back to the executive function and the limbic thing, you feel more emotional, don't you, if you've not slept well?
If you're tired anyway, your prefrontal cortex is not on. It's not online. You go offline, and then you're at the mercy of the limbic system. And if we go into Eastern culture back in the Middle Ages, they called it the elephant and the rider. And the limbic system was the elephant and the prefrontal cortex was the rider. Now you can see the difference in strength there. So if the rider falls asleep on the elephant's going to go and do what it wants. It's not going to be bothered about what the rider now wants. So that's why we can be very, very susceptible when when they could call it tired and emotional, Lucinda. It's tired and emotional.
Yeah.
That's why you can be a little bit more emotional than you would be normally. And I've got 6-month-old twins and I'm feeling tired and emotional regularly.
I bet. Gosh. Yeah, that's tricky. And so in terms of, are there any tips for people to improve that?
Yes, there are. It's very much like trying to sleep train twins, actually. You have to have a routine at bedtime. iPad, I'm sorry to say it, everyone, but iPads, phones, blue light, TVs, take them out of the bedroom. Take them out of the bedroom, because blue light, it's the equivalent when the eyes see blue light and it goes through the brain. The brain thinks it's sunlight, so it wakes up. We think, it's daytime, let's wake up. And they recommend no blue light within an hour of bedtime. Mm-hmm. So take the phone out, take any distractions. Bedtime is for bedtime. So you go to bed, you turn the light off. Possibly you can read if you want, but they recommend you go in there, light off, have a schedule, have a routine for bed. Because what that does, as soon as you start your routine, your brain knows, it's bedtime. I'll start the chemicals, flowing around. Some of the chemicals start to, and it's very difficult to run out. Norepinephrine is one of them. And what they do is it starts triggering neurons in your brain to say, right, bedtime, start relaxing. And then after a while, these chemicals get together and you fall asleep. And then you should do that naturally. If you're having to take sleeping tablets or anything like that, all that's giving you is a chemically induced sleep, and it's not as deep and it's not as good quality as it would do naturally. So the tip is have a routine at bedtime and get rid of your mobile phone, because it will just destroy your sleep patterns.
And we're also tempted to be on it all the time, aren't we? And one of the other things I think that helps getting off to sleep, I often have it is a hot bath, because there's something about your body cooling down. That's supposed to trigger going to sleep. Yeah,
your body needs to be cool when you sleep. You cool down. So we've all been there in the summertime when it's really warm and we can't get to sleep. It's because when you sleep, your body temperature will naturally drop. I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it will drop a certain amount. And what that does, it allows the body just to go into its sleep routine, and everything starts to shut down. And also, if you've eaten before going to bed, it's very difficult to get you to full natural deep sleep if you're digesting food. The body will prioritize the digestion of food over sleep. That's why sometimes if you had a heavy meal a couple of hours before bed, you find it difficult to go to sleep. So there's lots and lots of different things you can do. And they're like, it's like a lot of the old wives' tale are actually true. You see, don't eat heavily before you go to bed, all that sort of stuff. But the rule of thumb is 4 hours before going to bed is have your dinner, and at least 4 hours before bedtime, and that should give you a good buffer of when you can go.
Any tips for falling back asleep if you're someone who wakes up in the middle of the night?
Yes, get up, go for a walk around the house, start your routine. I wouldn't say start your routine again, but get up and make it feel as if it's now bedtime again. Because if you just lie there and toss and turn, all that's happening, you're in your brain. Your brain's got two networks. It's got the task positive network and the default mode network. Task positive network is that when you're concentrating. Can I think of something that? So if you're driving somewhere you've never been before, you concentrate very hard on where you're going.
Yeah.
That's positive. Everything else becomes irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Your phone could ring, you might not notice it. Mm-hmm. Your default mode network is almost like your daydreaming mode. It's all about thinking about yourself and what you've done. Generally, your default mode networks make you think more negative stuff than positive, but that's just
so that's where you worry in the middle of the night type thing. You can't switch your brain off.
Get up, get the task positive network in, think of something. Maybe get a hot drink or something like that. So it's not caffeine, no, because caffeine will just, forget it. Caffeine's got a half-life of six hours, so you won't sleep. but do that, and don't just dwell in the bed and think, well, I need to get back to sleep, because the more you think about it, the less it will happen. So you have to try and get up, take your mind off it, and then go back.
And to re-trigger your routine. Okay, very good. That's great. Thank you. So so then moving on, one of the other things we were talking about, which I suppose is a little bit about why you get those brain in the middle of the night, or you're getting distracted, but also links to our prioritization, is about multitasking. So we are all sort of we're being interrupted the whole time. We've got our phones and everything on our desks. We've got goodness knows how many apps and applications open at the same time. But that's not good for our brain, right?
No, I love talking about multitasking, Lucinda. I really do, because I think it's hilarious the amount of people say, it's all right, I'll multitask it, and I just raise my eyebrows and think, you just won't do it as well as you could do. So the brain, as we've talked about, to do anything, any task, we have to engage the prefrontal cortex. Now let's put that into some kind of, I don't know, let's set the scene, if you like, to see what the difference is in how much information we can store in the prefrontal cortex compared to the rest of the brain. So if, let's say you had some loose change in your pocket or your purse, Lucinda, half a dozen coins, say, that's your prefrontal cortex. That's how much information it can hold at any given time. How many coins do you think the limbic system would be?
I'm guessing more. It's bigger, is it?
Yeah. How about the total economy of the United States?
Wow, okay.
There's quite a difference. Or if you had a cardboard box which was a meter square, and that was all the information, the limbic system would be the Milky Way.
Wow.
The difference in how much information it can hold is ridiculous. And this leads on to, in a bit, hopefully, we can chat about how top performers perform at the best, because it leads on to that. So when we're doing a task, we've got to remember that our prefrontal cortex can only hold about 4 pieces of information in it at any given time. We've all been there when we try and juggle things and stuff like that. We can feel it. It gets tired. You frown, and you start frowning and things like that, and things start to get difficult. But if you think of our prefrontal cortex, a task, it's an elevator. And it'll only let one thing in and out at the same time. And that task, it'll only allow one task in. So what we do is task switch very quickly. So we'll do 5 minutes on that, a minute on the phone. Over here, we look at, boy, for you've done 10 tasks in an hour, but they're all rubbish, absolute rubbish. I think somebody said somewhere that once we start multitasking, we go from an MBA graduate down to an 8-year-old in the amount of thinking we can do, because we can't hold the information. We can only think of 4 things at a time, but we can only deal with 1 at a time. Whereas our limbic system can millions of things at a time. Now, and that leads on to why some of I mentioned in the email is Roger Federer or Serena Williams. How is it when the pressure's on and, it's match point and they win more than not? Because what they do, they practice. And they take this decision making from the very slow, painful part of the brain into the very fast part of the old part of the brain. Because they practice, it gets embedded in a place called the basal ganglia, which is several different parts of the brain. And this is where fast things. So when we're driving a car, we don't drive it with the prefrontal cortex, we drive it with the basal ganglia. We can do that and tune the radio, look out the window, talk to our friend, do whatever we want to do, because we don't have to think about it once it's down there. And what the really top performers are, they work that hard at practicing what they do, deliberate practice. It gets embedded in the fast part of the brain. So when it comes to high pressure situations, they're not thinking about it because it's already pre-programmed in them. And it's difficult to do, but once you do, it can be incredibly powerful. But multitasking, it's only task switching. You only ever switch tasks. You can only ever do one thing at a time.
And it's interesting. Would you say that's the same if you've got, say, the radio on in the background or music or something? I mean, I find I can't actually listen to things at the same time. I can listen to podcasts if I'm going for a walk, but I suppose that at the end of the day, that's something that's not really multitasking, because I know how to walk without thinking about it, right? Yeah. In working, that's, I suppose, an example, is it?
Yeah, any sort of interference, we call it, that goes in the brain, definitely. So say you've driven to work and you know the way, you don't even have to think about it. But when you get there, you've got to reverse into a particularly tight parking space next to a brand new car. Do you turn the radio off when you reverse? Because your brain will tell you, I need to concentrate. So you turn the radio off. I'm concentrating on one thing at a time. And some of us even stick our tongue out while we're doing it because we really have to concentrate. And
Why
that's
does that come from, sticking your tongue out? I
don't know. But you have to turn that radio. You get rid of that interference because
the kids, if they're talking to you, someone's talking to you, and I go, no, hang on, I've got to concentrate on this roundabout or something like that. You've got to think about it
because your brain won't allow you to deal with the interference on the other side. So it's fascinating, but it just shows that multitasking is a myth. And if somebody says I'm a great multitasker, all it says is they can do lots of things not very well at the same time.
Again, so it is about prioritising again. So the things that, and the more important tasks, therefore, do them when they're fresh and when you are able to avoid interruptions and things like that, so that you can actually focus and get them done in the shortest amount of time possible. That is the most effective way of getting it done. So you talked about Roger Federer, the top performers. So when you were saying about that, so basically it's practice. You're saying that, but how do they shut out the emotional? Just because they have practiced it so much, they just don't switch on the emotion. I think like a penalty shootout, or people like they don't feel the emotional bit of it.
Can you drive your car if you're in a mood?
Yeah.
So that it's so embedded, it doesn't matter what the rest of their brain is. It's it becomes automatic, like breathing or eating or the heart rate or controlling temperature. It's something the body does that they don't. So they can actually be thinking about what they're having for their tea that night and still win match point at Wimbledon because they've worked so hard. It's ingrained in their basal ganglia that it becomes an automatic function of what they do. And that's what separates the really, really top people from the people who don't quite do. Because you always hear of those people who succumb to pressure. And that's simply what it is. It's just they haven't worked as hard as Serena Williams or Roger Federer to be as good as they've got. Unfortunately, talent is overrated.
So I'm just wondering how you might apply that to the workplace, actually. So in terms of, as if we are feeling under pressure, we might be. So it's about creating good habits then, in terms of where you would work, is it?
It is, and I always put it to. I'm involved in learning and development, and when somebody comes in to do a learning intervention of whatever it is, the business generally says, oh, that's great, we've trained them, they can now do it. But the learning happens away when they go and practice. And whether it's having difficult conversations with their team or it's a process, the more they do it, the better they'll get at it and the more automatic it becomes in the future. So they don't have to worry about it so much. But it's a habit, it's a double-edged sword. Habit. You can have good habits, bad habits. And that's where your habits are stored, in your basal ganglia. It's that cue, response, reward sort of cycle that comes from there. So you hear a cue, you do something, you get the reward of dopamine or oxytocin in the brain and stuff like that. But that leads on to other things, of course.
Yeah, I guess we could go all about the dopamine hits and various things. So then the final thing we thought we'd explore today is about change, really, because we've been going through lots of change over the last year. We don't like change. Is that again because is that linked to habit, as being creatures of habit?
Well, there's no pressure here, Lucinda. Talking to somebody who's penned a book all about change.
Not about the brain and change, though.
I'm make sure I get this right. Yeah, but the brain doesn't like change. The brain will always take the path of least resistance. That's the way it's programmed to do that. And it doesn't like change. The brain is a prediction machine. It's like it likes to foretell the future. So it likes to be able to see what's happening, the same thing. So when we go back hundreds of thousands of years and we all lived on the savannah, every day was pretty much the same. You woke up, you found food, you ate as a tribe or as a family.
Sounds like lockdown, John.
Yeah, it sounds just like, and you go to sleep at night. Unfortunately, our brain is still on the savannah. It hasn't evolved. 100,000 years is not long enough for our brain to evolve. We need millions of years. And unfortunately, our brain will not evolve to the 21st century until something like the 500,000th century or something like that. So when it comes across change, what that's telling us is that something's not safe. That it gives us a threat or
fight or flight response.
Threat response, fight or flight response, or freeze, because you can freeze as well. And because back in the days of when we lived on the savannah, change killed you. It's as simple as that. So if you did something differently, generally something would go wrong and you would get killed by another tribe, or you'd fall off a cliff, or you'd get eaten by an animal or something like that. But our brain hasn't evolved. So in the workplace now, when something new comes along, our brain still sees it as that life or death threat, when it really isn't. We can train ourselves out of that, and we can say, you know what, we can reflect on things and reappraise things and make sure that, you know, we're not falling into the trap of the brain tricking, because the brain will try and trick us, and it will make us do things that are not in our own interest because it wants to keep us alive. The brain is geared to survive, but it's not geared to thrive. We have to do the thriving ourselves. So it's really important that any change, that we communicate it properly, people understand why it's done, and we're not doing change to people, we do it with them. But you know all about that.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I mean, obviously that's something that I advocate. I wouldn't have known there was a root in the brain, which makes sense. Tell me more about that, the statement you made there about it's not designed to thrive, we're there to survive but not thrive. No,
the brain is, I'm just keeping an eye. I've got my iPad plugged in, but it's still losing power, and it's on 2%, so which is really annoying. However, if I die,
we're nearly there. If it disappears, we're listening.
Yeah, so the brain, if we think back to the savannah, what was our brain programmed to do? Keep us alive, reproduce, keep our offspring alive. It's as simple as that. And it's still the same now, still the same. All we are wired to do is reproduce, survive, look after our children. That's why our bond with our children is so strong, because our brain, one of our fundamental human needs is to reproduce and look after them. However, that's all it looks for. If we can do that, the brain is happy. But we're not programmed to thrive. We're not programmed to have nice houses and be psychologically well. Physically well, our brain will look after. Unfortunately, our limbic system has no thought for our psychological well-being. That's why sometimes we can do things and think things that are not in our own interest, which is, you know, we're going into the realms of quite deep psychology there, and I won't go there because A, I'm not qualified, and B, it can be quite dangerous for people sometimes to talk about that stuff without having the correct knowledge. But what I'm saying is we have to work hard at being healthy mentally. Survival will do that. We'll be scared of things. The brain will do that automatically. We will not take risks. We'll have risk aversion. The brain will do that automatically. But it won't tell us for a second, you need to be mindful of this situation. It doesn't say you need to go away and take a rest or have some exercise. All it will say is there's a threat, be aware, either fight or flight.
So we have to create those conscious, we have to learn and create those conscious
and that's why mindfulness is so powerful, and exercise and sleep, because you do all these things, and it's all about making sure your prefrontal cortex is online for as long of your day as it can be.
Because that's the bit that's the bit that has the resourcefulness to think about our well-being, is it? And that's the bit that would allow us to decide to recharge and look after ourselves.
Our limbic system and our even older part, which is a reptilian complex, has no concern for our mental well-being. None. It wants to keep us alive, and that's the only thing it's interested in. Our prefrontal cortex will do everything it can to keep us mentally well. However, it's only got a very small battery. And that's the big conundrum.
So that's also about prioritising the things that, so let's say exercise and other things that are going to making sure you prioritise those. Some people, personally, I put better first thing in the day. I know that I kind of say if I haven't exercised by midday, it's not going to happen. I think my willpower is gone.
Why is that?
Because I can't make myself do it. I'd rather not.
Because and that's another thing about it. Motivation is not enough, because you have to create a habit, because motivation will always let you down. Because like you say, if it comes to lunchtime, you've got no motivation to it, because your prefrontal cortex has already gone, I've used enough today, I'm not done. Doing anymore. It's first in the morning, your prefrontal, let's do it. Let's go. And they always say, always building habits and processes, because your motivation will always let you down.
Well, that sounds like a sensible place to conclude there, John. That was a great whistle-stop tour through this. There's other things I'd like to talk about another day, things like personality and stuff in terms of the brain. You know, tell me all about that sometime.
It's great. It fascinates me because everybody's got one, but we know so little about it. And it's the more we can understand it, I think the happier we'll be. We will be.
Yes, absolutely. John, thank you so much for being on the HR Uprising podcast and sharing some of your knowledge. And good luck with your book. You're writing a book called 21st Century Neuroleadership. How are you getting on with that?
I'm all right. I've given myself, I mean, you know what it's like to write a book, but I don't know how quickly you did yours, but I'm giving myself a good couple of years to do it. You know, it's not something I'm expecting to do quickly, but especially with this, because you have to do so much research to make sure you're getting everything right.
Given the topic that you're working on. Yes, definitely.
But yeah, it's good. I'm just talking at the moment, just explaining the different parts of the brain and what they do. So, but it's good for me. I learn a lot while doing it, so I'm enjoying it.
Great. So if anyone wants to join or to connect with you, I guess you're on LinkedIn, aren't you? I know, because I'm LinkedIn there. I'll put your details in the show notes. How else can they get you?
LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. I haven't got a website. I'm fairly boring. I haven't got a website. Contact me on LinkedIn and I will chew your ears off about it. Not a problem.
So, John, thanks so much. And I'll put your LinkedIn details on the show notes. I appreciate you coming on the HR Uprising podcast. Thank
you, Lucinda. And you have a wonderful week.
Thank you. And you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising, proudly brought to you by Actus Software, the joined-up performance and talent management solution. You can access links to any of the information or resources mentioned in the show via the podcast page at www.hruprising.com. If you like what we do, please subscribe, tell your colleagues, and leave a review. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising.